You're listening to the Transform Your Life from the Inside Out podcast. This episode is titled, Fear is the Idleness of Will. And basically what that means is that when you get into fear, you're not using that life force in you, and I don't mean willpower, but you're not using that life force in you to will what it is that you want to create in life. If you'd like to learn more about that, well, keep listening.
Hi, I'm Jim Fortin, and you're about to start transforming your life from the inside out with this podcast. I'm widely considered the leader in subconscious transformation, and I've coached super achievers all around the world for over 25 years. Here, you're going to find no rah-rah motivation and no hype, because this podcast is a combination of brain science, transformational psychology, and ancient wisdom all rolled into one to take your life to levels you've never thought possible. If you're wanting a lot more in life, to feel better, to heal, to have peace of mind, to feel powerful and alive, and to bring more abundance and prosperity into your life, then this podcast is for you, because you're going to start learning how to master your mind and evolve your consciousness. And when you do that, anything you want then becomes possible for you. I'm glad you're here.
Okay, fear is the idleness of will. And what does that mean? You know, when you look at it at face value, what does that mean? Fear is the idleness of will. For most people, they would think, well, that just, sounds like gibberish to me, because they don't have any context or, any past background and understanding that we can will things into existence. Now, the first time that I heard that phrase was many, many years ago by an occultist named Eliphas, there we go, Eliphas, Eliphas Levi. And I didn't hear it from him personally, obviously, because he lived 200 years ago. Maybe I heard it from him back then in a past life. But I heard it somewhere. And I used to read a lot of his material. And that was a big phrase in there. He has some very powerful phraseology in some of his work and some very powerful things that he talks about. But for many years, people have said, Jim, you've worked with a shaman for a lot of years. What are your favorite phrases? And I think three come to mind, right away. And those, I've got several, but those would be, you are where your attention is. Everything always has been, is now, and will always be fine. That phrase right there got me easily through 2020, last year, when I had heart failure and a stroke, and I'm perfectly fine today. And then the topic of this episode, the quote, one of my favorites, is fear is the idleness of will. A couple of days ago, I was thinking about what I wanted to do for this episode. And I don't know the titles and all that kind of stuff till it just pops in my mind. And I spend every day in some spiritual practice. And I just let, come to me what comes to me, or it comes to me in dream time, or the epiphany, or the aha, or the spiritual inspiration, or whatever it might be. It just comes to me and floats into my consciousness. And a couple of days ago, I got a gift from one of my students named Padma, and it was a journal. And I do journal. I journal a lot. And it was a journal, and it was leather bound, and it had my company logo on it. And she had one quote, embossed in the leather on the cover. And it was, fear is the idleness of will. And I'm like, that is my podcast episode topic this week. And this phrase, fear is the idleness of will, I learned this many, many years ago. And I'm going to tell you candidly, it's been the metaphorical lifesaver for me, because I'm no different than anyone else. I've just learned different tools over the years, and I really don't get into fear at all. And I used to be a very fearful person about especially worry. And that's even the idleness of will. worry is what I call insecure thinking. And that worry is what you're really saying is that you're so insecure that you're at the mercy of life and you're at the mercy of your circumstances. And I used to get into worry. And when I learned this, I'm like, when I learn, and I'm thinking back, recapitulating, I'm thinking what I said to myself, decades ago is, this will. When I learn to use my will, then what's the purpose and why would I even need to get into the fear that I normally get into? And then fast forward to 2020 when I had heart failure, the earlier part of the year, and then a stroke the last part of the year. And now just mind you here very quickly is I used to hate anything. And I don't hate anything, but I air quote hate, hospitals. And I definitely don't like them because of the energy in them. It's just toxic. I mean, it's like rolling in a pit of fear when you can feel energy because of all the fear in hospitals. I mean, people go in there and they're in fear the whole time. That was the worst part of the time in the hospital for me, was the toxicity of people's energy in there. And I can feel it. But the thing was this, when I was in there for heart failure, I had zero fear about any outcome that could possibly be. And I was even actually surprised because it's easy for us to say one thing and it's different for us to walk or talk. And when I was in the hospital, I used to hate hospitals, and I was there and I was like, no biggie, no big deal. The worst part of my entire time in the hospital was when they came and woke me up every morning at 5 a.m. to take blood. I don't mind needles either. I'm not afraid of them. But man, there's some nurses that sometimes they're just not that gentle when they're taking blood. And that was the worst part of the whole thing for me. But I was surprised at how easily I floated through the experience. And one of the things that most got me through it was the phrase, fear is the idleness of will. And I even remember my brother-in-law, Don Javier, calling me. And he talked to me. He said, use your will, because he's been talking to me about will for a lot of years. He said, use your will to heal yourself. And basically, let's talk about what that is will is using the life force within you. And I have an episode here. I don't know what episode it is. Maybe, 190, 80, somewhere in that range. It's about a year old. And I did an episode on using your intention and using your will. But let's go here for a moment. Is that we all have within us a life force. Like George Lucas, may the force be with you. But we have this life force. I mean, we're energy. This is not an opinion. It's not metaphysics. It's not woo-woo. It's literally physics. It's science. It's cosmology. It's math. But we have this life force within us. And without this life force, we're nothing more than a dead bag of skin, quite literally. I mean, once you stop breathing, about 8 hours later, because it takes about 8 hours for the physical body to die. I mean, even when men, kick the bucket, they're still having to shave them a day later because, the hair's still growing on their face. But there's this life force in us. And I'm going to use the word most of the population has, number one, they've never even thought about this life force. And even a smaller part of the population, there we go, even knows how to use and how to, what I call, channel this will. But we have this force within us, and we can actually use our attention to direct this will to create what it is that we want to create in life. I also want to point out that when I say will, the first thing that most people think is, willpower. I'm going to make something happen. It's yes, but no, because this is not about willpower, because that's a left brain function. This is much different. Plain and simple, it's like harnessing, literally like harnessing the thought form of life force within you. We all have it, inborn. And in simple terms, it's quite literally like channeling our minds to do what I call our bidding. So let me address that. And I'm going to just be, very brief here. But we all have this life force within us, and it's called consciousness. It's invisible, and most people aren't even, and I'm using the word most, and I've thought about the word. Yes, I'm using the word most intentionally. Most human beings have never even thought about it. They go through life like brute animals that think to some small degree. But we have this life force within us, and most of us aren't even conscious of being conscious beings. But this life force, it's an animate. You can't touch it. It's not physical. You can't bang your phone on it. You can't scratch it and sniff it and smell it. But it's this force within us. And when we're in fear, what we're doing is you're not properly directing it, because when you're in fear, you're using your attention and you're engaging your life force, but you're engaging your life force and your attention and you're directing it in the wrong direction. Most times we're directing our life force against what we don't want, which is fear-based. Therefore, we're creating more of what we don't want by keeping our intention and our attention on what we don't want. So we also place and we activate this life force within us when we place our intention and attention on an outcome, which means when we're wanting to make something happen. And let me give you a real life example here. And I can give you many because I've had many of these in my life, and I call these synchronicities as well. But 20 something years ago, 22 years ago, I lived in New York City. And when I moved there, I lived on the Upper East Side, which is it's a very clean part of town. And a lot of my friends used to call it white bread. I mean, it's just very banal. It's very, like suburban Minnesota, United States. I mean, it's just banal. There's nothing exciting. There's no culture. It's basically just a bunch of people in apartments, and it's actually the wealthiest neighborhood and part of Manhattan as well, for the most part. But I lived there for 2 years, and I wanted to move to the Upper West Side. My lease was up, and I'm like, I want to move to the Upper West Side, which is trendier, and it has just a whole different vibe than the East Side. And I remember I was walking on the Upper West Side because I used to spend a lot of time there. And I said, I want to live on 72nd Street between Central Park West and Broadway. It's exactly what I said. I want to live on the Upper West Side on 72nd Street between Central Park West and Broadway. Now, in that moment, I was literally setting my intention because I was already imagining it. I was already owning that. And a few months later, I met a friend at 72nd and Broadway. It's a big intersection. And remember, that's where I said I want to live, on 72nd Street between Central Park West and Broadway. And I was going to meet him at 72nd and Broadway. Now, this is the big intersection there, and it was really noisy. And I'm like, I don't want to live on 72nd Street. I want to live on 73rd Street. And I even voiced that voiced it aloud. And I said, I told my friend Chris, I want to live on 73rd Street. I didn't want to live on the 72nd, but now it's 73rd. And I had this other criteria in mind. And that criteria is that I wanted the same amount of rent. I wanted a spiritual roommate. And I say roommate because I didn't want to get my own place because I didn't know how much time I was going to stay in New York, whether it be a year or 5. And so I wanted a spiritual roommate. And in New York City, it's no big deal. I mean, many people, tons of people have roommates. And I said, I want a roommate who likes dogs. And here's a biggie. And if you've ever lived in New York City, you'll know what this means. I want my own bathroom. Anyway, I had the intuition to go to a rental. Back then, we used to go to rental places that had rental listings. And they didn't have anything when I went, but I had the intuition to go then. And when I got back to my apartment on the Upper East Side, the little light on my answering machine was blinking. And I called them and they said, Jim, we don't normally do this, but somebody walked in 5 5 minutes after you walked out, and they had seemingly what you're looking for, exactly what you're looking for. Here, give this person a call. And I called him. His name was Will, and I was the first person to call him on his listing. And we talked a couple of times that month. I went over to meet him. I had to take my dog over for an air quote, and I'm being kidding, but I had to take my dog over, which is a black lab, for an interview. And he invited me to move in. And when I moved in, let me share with you, is that my rent was 78 cents more than it was on the Upper East Side. He was pretty spiritual. I had my own bathroom. It was a big apartment, 3 bedrooms, which is massive in New York City, two baths. I had my own bathroom. And he let me move in because he really liked my dog. He's like, I loved your, I had a black lab. I mean, what's not to like about a black lab, you know? He goes, I love your dog. But here's the thing. Are you ready? My address was, and I kid you not, I mean, I can't make this up. Well, I can make it up, but I wouldn't make it up. My address was 170 West 73rd Street, New York, New York. I mean, you can look it up. That was my address, 170 West 73rd. Now, it doesn't matter if you look it up. You'll find the building, but you're not going to find my apartment in the building. And how is it that 2 months earlier, I'm standing in the street, a block, the south part of the block from my apartment door, saying, I'm going to live here. And then, no, I want to live 1 block north, which was the exact, it was the exact street where my apartment building entered. My doorway was facing 73rd Street, but we were at the corner of Broadway and 73rd, or Amsterdam and 73rd, but literally 100 feet apart. How does that happen? Well, how it happens is that I willed it. I remember a friend of mine named Melissa from college 25 years ago. Geez, it might have even been longer, 1987. And she was in a radio contest where you called in. If you were the 99th caller, you got a key for a brand new home. And they did this 99 days in a row. And she got a key. She was like the 99th caller, whatever time of day they had that competition. She got a key, and she said, you know what? Before she picked up the key, she said, I am going to own that home. And then what happened was, it is big, radio promotion and, media there and TV and all that. And all these people showed up that had keys, 99 keys. And whoever's key fit the lock on the front door won the house. And I remember it's so poignant. I remember her saying that when she pulled up, there were a lot of people already there, and there were people standing in the front yard. And she said very firmly, what are these people doing standing in my yard and on my grass? What are these people doing standing in my yard and on my grass? Well, when it came her time to open the door and put her key in, guess what? Her key opened the house and she won the house. True story. She willed it. And I'm sure all of you listening, you probably know someone in your life where you've had some incident where we call it freaky or weird or whoa or woo-woo or mojo or whatever you want to call it. And the reality is that's using your will. And also, the point of this podcast is when you use your will, fear serves no purpose. So there's no reason to get into your fears and your doubts, because when you do that, you're simply just casting more fear, and you're using your will by keeping your attention there to cast more fear and doubt. So when you're using your will, let me just clarify here. When you're using your will, not your willpower, but your will, which is that force within you to will what it is you want to create. Now it's like casting a net, and you're casting your life force. And when you do that, you can make anything happen. Now, the fact is, it's a truism. You can make anything happen. And because you can make anything happen, what's the point of getting into fear? It's useless and it serves no purpose. Let me ask you this. Let's talk about what it feels like for you guys listening. Have you ever wanted something really bad and you made it happen? It could be when you were a kid. Maybe you wanted a new pair of shoes. And I don't want, be gender specific or sexist or anything, but when I was a boy growing up, I'd mow yards for money. When I wanted a new pair of Nikes or something, I would mow yards. Now listen very carefully. I wanted that pair of Nikes and I always got them. Why? Because I would use my will. Now let me explain what it means. Is we think, well, no, Jim, I use my action to get the Nikes. I use my action to mow the yards. But what I want you to look at, it was your thought that was sustaining the action. That's what I really want you to notice, because I've seen people take the same action, two people, and one falls flat on their face and one does well. But that's where the power is even though you're saying, I want those Nikes or that home or that health and wellness or whatever it is, when you use your will, you're literally casting your life force. But notice what it feels like again. And I don't want to rabbit trail here, because I often say to have everything is not to need or want anything. That's a whole different topic. But what I want you to notice is what it feels like when you're wanting something. Now let's separate that from actually how it feels to know that when you're wanting it. Let's separate that from you're already in the creation of it, because you have the feeling. Notice that. You have the feeling that, you know what, XYZ is coming my way. And when you can learn to harness that, it's a very little slippery slope. But when you can learn to harness that, because that is will, and then you direct it, let me tell you, that's where the power of the universe is. And that's where it comes in. I'm going to use this word, but channeled through you. That's when you become a vessel for the life force in you. When you get into fear, what you're doing is you're basically telling the quantum dimension, the quantum, let's say, physical world, if you will, because everything is physics. Everything is electrons, neutrons, and protons. Everything is frequency and vibration. It's just a matter of frequency and vibration. But when you get into your fear, you're basically telling the quantum world, the quantum world. And if it had words, it would sound something like this. But what you're basically saying is, you know what? Hey, world, I'm weak. I give up. I roll over. I'm a victim. I can't do it. And I'm going to just roll over, and I'm going to relinquish all my power to the external world. That's what most, and I'm going to use that word judiciously, and actually I'm using it by choice, but that's what most people do, is they roll over in the world and say, you know what? Yes, let me live by circumstances, instead of, you know what? Let me make it happen by casting my will. Now, what I want you to notice is when you're in fear, not the biological brain-based fear of survival, like somebody's pulling a knife on you or a gun or something like that, but I want you to notice when you're feeling weak, when you're feeling hopeless, when you're feeling, and not clinically, but just in terms of funk, you're feeling depressed. I want you to notice how you feel. You feel powerless, right? There's no power there because you've given away all your power. Now, I want you to contrast that, and I want you to notice when you've made something happen and you're like, yeah, I knew that was going to happen. You know what? And you're being all kind of proud. I did that. And I wanted that new car and I got it. Or I wanted that home and I got it. Or I wanted that job and I knew I was going to get it and I got it. Or you know what? One of the best examples, and we'll use it as an example, but think through how you can apply this in your own life. And the examples here in terms of, contrasting feeling weak versus feeling powerful. What about people, and we all know stories of people that have been diagnosed with stage 4, this, that, or the other. And what a fair percentage of the population will do is the doctors will say, you know what? You've got stage 4 XYZ. It's probably a good idea to get your affairs in order. And many people will subscribe to the doctor, make them authority figure, and they kick the bucket. They do, and they go downhill and downhill and downhill, and boom, they check out of the planet. Check out and check off the planet. And then, now these people have not used their will at all. And then there are people that are like, no ma'am, no sir. You know what? I've got grandbabies, or my kids are going to graduate from college, and I want to see my grandbabies, or I'm going to see my kids graduate from college, or there's something that or they could even say, you know what? No, I want to live a healthy life. And there is example after example after, example after example after example times 100 times 1,000 of people that have used their will to heal themselves. And what they did is they, air quote, I'm going to use this word carefully, they made something happen with using their will, which is that feeling, which is the life force. Now, there's an episode somewhere where I talk about, I think it's episode number 9, where I talk about manifestation and money, but I talk about frequency and vibration just a little bit, because the key is, or the catalyst for you guys, it's more than this, but I'm going to keep it simple to break it down, is where you want to focus is your feelings. Because the way that we work is we work from thought to feeling to vibration to frequency. Everything is frequency. Everything. It's physics. And here's the thing. Notice when you're thinking and you're down and how you feel. Basically, notice now, contrast that with how powerful you feel. You feel weak. I don't even want to do anything today. I don't feel good today. I'm depressed. Poor me. Victim mentality. What is this? What always happened to me in life, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we go from thought to feeling to vibration to frequency. And as I just said, everything is frequency, physics. And Tesla. You might have heard of Nikola Tesla. I mean, one of the most influential human beings in the history of the planet. I don't mean the car company, but I mean Nikola Tesla. And Tesla said, if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy and frequency and vibration. So I often ask myself, Jim, what is your frequency right now? And I know that what I feel is going to determine my frequency and vibration, which is literally like a homing pigeon. So I know that I cannot afford, whether I'm in the hospital or not. I was happy the whole time I was in the hospital. And I know people don't get that. I mean, it was not because of the energy, as I said, it wasn't an enjoyable place in terms of the frequency and vibration there. I could feel it. It's like mud. It was like nasty, dirty sewage water and molasses and mud. That's what the energy felt like to me in a hospital. But anyway, as I knew that I couldn't let that make me, air quote, or create a state in me where I, air quote, felt bad, I wouldn't go there. This is why you can't afford to get into fear and negativity and anger and hate and shame and greed and all these negative emotions that people get into. Because when you do, you're affecting your feeling, because how you feel how you think, and then you're affecting your vibration and your frequency, and literally you're nosediving, boom, right down into the ground. And notice more than anything, one of the purposes of this episode is that you have no power. You have no power, and you feel weak and powerless there. But yet when you're casting your will, You're on top of the world. When you know that you can make something happen. But most of us roll over. Let me segue here for a moment. We just opened a transformational coaching program last week. We've been promoting it for about a month here on the podcast as well. And we had 16,000 people registered initially. We had 6,000 on the training that registered. And we registered a lower amount than what was anticipated. We made some changes in the program, and that's why, and I'm fine with every bit of this. But here's the thing. There were many people, here's where I'm going with this, many people that wanted in the transformational coaching program. And when the investment point was revealed, it's not cheap. Honestly, it's not cheap. I deliver the best, and I deliver things that work and things that change, they change lives. And it's worth, as any of my students will tell you, 100 times the investment. But here's the thing, is when a lot of people saw the investment, they're like, oh, I want to, but I can't. Right then and there, they just rolled over metaphorically and they just rolled over and they gave up. That's what people do. That's what they do. But think about that. Not everyone does it. And I'm not saying everyone listening does that. But how many times have you done that? Something that you want, you're like, oh, can't do it. Can't have it. Can't afford it. Use your will. Use your will like I did in my apartment in New York City. And if you've ever lived in New York, you know how hard it can be to get an apartment. I mean, literally, I know people that have rented apartments and signed leases and never even visited the apartment. I mean, apartments are scarce in New York City. And I use my will. But there are so many people that could have registered that didn't, and they're going to keep repeating their patterns over and over and over again because they get into their fear instead of using their will to eliminate the fear and casting that will out into the universe and generating and attracting the revenue to be able to transform their life. And what they do is they repeat day 1, day 2, day 3, month 1, month 2, month 3, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 10, year after year after year, because they're powerless. They're powerless because they're living by the external world and they're not using their will. So what I want you to look at here, and I want you to start getting a handle on and playing with, and it doesn't matter what I want. I guess what I'm requesting is better said, is notice what that feels like. Notice what it feels like when, let's go here. I want you to think back to a time in the past when you knew that you wanted something and you were going to make it happen, and it happened. That is using your will right there. That's what you want to exercise. And why? Because when you exercise it, it's like a muscle, and it becomes stronger and stronger and stronger each and every time you do it, and you learn how to do it. But what I want you to notice more than anything, even though we don't need to go into frequency and vibration, even though I mentioned it, is I want you to notice the feeling, because that's where you want to start working from in life. So as you can see, and hopefully it's obvious by now, you can create anything you want. Anything. How do you think people go from like John Paul DeJory? He goes from homeless to billionaire status. How do people go from dead broke to wealthy? How do people go from unhealthy to healthy? They will it is literally what they're doing, but they don't know they're willing it. That is the power. And guess what? Here's the thing. Are you ready? It's free. It is free. You were born with this power. It's built in. It's factory built in. I mean, it comes with this, it's standard equipment when you're born. And you have this power to cast whatever it is you're wanting to create into the universe and then willing it to happen. Because you've often heard me say, people try to go out and they try to do things. They want more money, more house, better cars, better schools, whatever. And they try to do things and make it happen. And it doesn't happen. Why? Because you can't do your way to more in life. What you can do is that you can will your way to more, to more in life. So here's the big takeaway. Here's the transformational takeaway, is that fear is the idleness of will. And when you're in fear, examine that. When you're in fear, whether it be about your health, and oh my gosh, I hope I don't get worse. Or I don't have enough money and I hope the bill collector doesn't come. Or I hope I get a job. I hope I get a job. I hope I get a job. I mean this with respect because I've been there before. I used to be one of those people many decades ago. That's victim mentality. That's basically rolling over and saying, hey, life, universe, I have no power. I'm rolled over like an armadillo on my back and I have no power. Now the metaphor here would be, is do you roll over like an armadillo or do you fight like a warrior? Now I don't want you to fight anything, okay? I'm just using that as a metaphor. I mean, you look at a strong warrior. I mean, they're out to win. And now again, I don't want to go into that stuff in terms of doing, but I'm using it as a metaphor. But take that doing and then feel what that feels like and then use your mind. And when you use your mind for that, you have zero reason to go into worry and fear, because fear is the idleness of will. Okay. If you would please, if you enjoy the podcast, we're wanting to grow our reach. I'm wanting to reach more people and assist more people. It doesn't cost you anything. If you would please share this podcast with your friends and family. Share it on Instagram. Share it on Facebook. Share it via email if you want. You know, you can even share it this day and age on Clubhouse, which is a new app. But please pay it forward and share. Okay. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for listening. I'm grateful, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Okay, do what you can to make it a great day today. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this entire podcast. If you're the kind of person who likes to help others, then share this with your friends and family. You know, if you found value, they will too. So please share via your social media channels. Also, if you have questions, I'm here to assist. You can email me questions to support@jimfortin.com, and I may even use your question for a future podcast episode. Also, if you want transformational content like this daily, connect with me on Instagram. My Instagram name is I am Jim Fortin. Finally, I do have a personal request. I believe that we're all here to help others and to grow and evolve ourselves. Together, you and I, let's help more people. If you would please leave a review on iTunes, and a good one, by the way. I'd be grateful, and through your assistance together, we can transform more lives. Thanks for listening.